Great, thanks, Lee. Well, welcome everybody. Wisdom's UK Chats number 4, I think, is it? If I'm correct, I think it's number 4. Number 5. Number 5. How time flies. And when you're in the matrix, who knows what's happening? You're just time's an illusion. Your life is an illusion. Everything's an illusion. But the real question is, how do you handle criticism? So yeah, we never criticize anybody. So we're all good people. We're nice, we're nasty, but some of us, coming through the occasional spot of criticism. So let's see how we deal with that this morning. There's Sven. So Sven, morning to you. Welcome. Joining us now as well. So there's the man.
Morning, Sven.
Hello, Sven. How are you doing?
Good morning.
Hi, Sven. Welcome.
Sven, morning.
I'm glad you're here this morning, Sven, because I think this topic is right up your alley. Dealing with criticism.
Tame your inner critic.
The inner critic, well, the inner and outer critic. So I think got to find out who it is and where it is and how do we deal with them. But let's start with Trevor this morning. So Trevor, I know how you deal with criticism, but let's hear it from you.
Right, so criticism. I think it's like bathing. The more you bath, the cleaner you get. The more criticism you get, the more you can actually just brush it off your shoulders. So I'm afraid I've always been one that's been criticized quite highly by many, many people. And it's just a fact of life. When you put yourself out there and you stick your head up above the parapets to actually see what's going on, you tend to catch most arrows. So just given it some medieval context there for Ed Chapman, because I know that's where he lives, castles and parapets and all that sort of thing. Yeah, so if the topic is how do you deal with criticism, just, you know what, shake it off. But if I can add something savvy to this, which is quite unusual, Ivan, I can see you raising your eyebrows. I think the best way to deal with criticism is to get as much knowledge as you can about the particular topic or whatever it is that you're actually going to do to understand where those arrows are actually coming from and how you can actually deflect them and be prepared for it. So it's about doing your homework before you actually dare to put your head up above the parapet. Hope that helps.
Thanks, Trevor. Yeah, you went the medieval route. I thought we were going to go start talking about the tall poppy syndrome, seeing that you were on the poppies and various other things in one of our other sessions earlier. But we'll leave that perhaps for another discussion. So yeah, I think on that note, Ed, seeing that you were spoken about in the medieval context, we better just see how evil you are and whether it's medi or not.
I'm totally confused now because Trevor thinks I'm in the Dark Ages and Lee thinks I'm a Renaissance man. So yeah, I mentioned before the recording started that I hadn't been to any networking events last week, and that was because of criticism. And I'll come to that a bit later, but unfortunately, I would think I was about 50 before someone gave me, so just out of the Middle Ages, before someone gave me a piece of advice on how to avoid criticism. And it's a piece of advice I have followed to the letter ever since. And the way to avoid criticism is to say nothing, do nothing, and be nothing. And I would add a fourth to that, and it's learn nothing. Because I think through criticism, we learn. And it's interesting, you know I like my dictionary, or I turned to my dictionary and looked up criticism. And it's kind of got two slants on it. One is finding fault, which I think is quite a negative thing. And the other is an article, essay, etc., expressing an analytical evaluation of something, which is a positive thing. And in my new profession, which is, as a writer, criticism is really welcome. Well, it's actually, it's only welcome really in one place, and that's before you've published. And that's why I've been avoiding networking, because I sent a piece of work off to someone more experienced than I am, who's been published a lot, who's an editor, and she came back with lots of analytical evaluation of what I'd written. And she's right. I put things in there where I knew the backstory, but no one else did, so she didn't understand them. And she said, Edward, you've got to give the context here. And then she came along and said, look, that might be interesting to you, but it's not interesting to everyone else. Cut it out. And even though it hurt because it was a bit I loved, she was right. Cut it out. So I think actually criticism in the right way is really healthy. But of course, once you've published that book and some jumped up journalist decides to rubbish it, then that's not so helpful. And I've just been reading a book from a writer who her first book, before a book actually hits the streets, it is seen by reviewers and critics, and it got absolutely slammed by the critics. Yet when it was published, it was a bestseller. So what do the critics say? Yeah, so I think criticism, you take it in the right way, and I think don't try and avoid it, welcome it, but avoid harsh criticism by actually always trying to do your best and do it with the best of intentions. And then the criticism you get will be improvements rather than finding fault and having a snipe at you. So yeah, I avoid criticism, not at all, because I like to say something, I like to be something, I like to do something, and I like to learn. So for me, I embrace criticism.
Right, thanks, Ed. And yeah, so I was a bit worried when you kicked that thing off. And so Ed is a big fat nothing, you know, you do nothing, be nothing, say nothing, learn nothing. Well, that I was wondering what we've been doing with you all these months, but now I know. So yeah, great input on that one as well. So yeah, criticism, constructive criticism, destructive criticism. Lee, how do you feel about all of that?
Well, you know, I'm not as tough as Edward and Trevor. So I definitely had a very soft skin. You know, any little barb would sort of, I'd mull over and angst over for months, you know. and I realized that a lot of it had to do with my perfectionism. That I wanted things to be absolutely perfect, whatever it was, whether it was a talk or a essay or a tea party. And my mother-in-law had if I think about criticism, she had the perfect skill of being able to point out the one thing that I hadn't done if it came to setting a table or putting the meat out, and she was, or you know, the food out, or whatever the case may be, and she'd come and whisper in my ear, there's no salt on the table. And you know, I would get myself into a complete, you know, that I wasn't perfect. And I realized this incredible pressure that I was putting on myself in this false image of what perfection actually is. And one of the things that cured me is, well, there were two things, two very important moments in my life that I grew exponentially through criticism. And the one was through writing, Edward. I wrote a book, but I co-authored it with two other women. And that is a very challenging exercise, because you've got three very different people with three very different writing styles, all of us first-time authors, so none of us really knowing what we're doing, but all very precious about what we're writing and what we're saying, because we were writing about our pregnancies So it was a story for pregnant women. So it was very close to our hearts, and an emotional subject. And of course, we were all enthusiastic about writing. And so all very, and we had to learn how to say to each other, that's not working. You may think it's beautiful prose, but exactly like Edward was saying, it's either the message isn't coming across, you're being too verbose, or, you know, it's just unclear, or it's too, whatever the case may be. We had to toughen up. And I learned a lot there about accepting criticism as a tool to improve. And it actually just increased, as a side note, increased my love of writing. I realized that language is incredibly malleable. Just because you didn't get it right this time doesn't mean that you can't reinvent, reshape, and something else comes up, and it's can also be reshaped. And so it's a beautiful art to be able to do that. And then the second thing, in terms of where I learned how criticism actually was so beneficial for me, is I had been facilitating emotional intelligence, soft skills programs, so personal and leadership development type programs for many years. And then I formed a partnership, or I started facilitating deal making, sales and negotiation to top end salespeople. And I didn't have a clue. And the people that I was working with would very kindly but very clearly say, I am not making the mark. And if I keep going down this route, I am not going to be able to facilitate these programs. And there was something in me that just said, you know what? I'm going to do this. I hear what they're saying. They're not wrong. But I used the criticism as a launching pad to learn, to grow, to practice, I spent hours just honing and building and practicing, and each time getting better. And so it was incredibly productive and creative, and it was an opportunity for me to dig deep and to say, okay, you're not good at this now, accept that. And now if you want to get good at it, this is what you're going to have to do. So yeah, that's the story of criticism, the journey of criticism. And now I'm almost like Trevor, not one, maybe I do one shoulder. The other shoulder is still hurting, but this shoulder I'm good at. Just, okay.
Thanks, Lee. Yeah, you know, I don't know. Sometimes these things do rub off, and sometimes they rub in. You know, and you've got to see how it goes. But maybe we just need to take a pregnant pause here, and you know, just reflect on what Lee's had to say, and then get across to, you know, high-level negotiation. So that must be Kelvin. So Kelvin, inspire us with your dealings with criticism.
Hey, cheers, Ivan. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everybody. I think we've all, almost especially I'm talking about myself, I don't like criticism. And I think I'm my biggest self-critic. And I think, again, it's I could look when I started doing what I was doing, what I'm doing now in 2014, from the corner of my room, and still working in the bank, trying to even I remember putting the first video out there in the public domain, and I made mistakes, I made blunders, and something wasn't right. And I would just get home and feel sick to my stomach. Like, what have I done? Oh my God. And you know, the fear, the perfectionism, you want to be perfect, you want to get it right. And just knowing that you're not going to get it right, you know, sometimes can be crippling. So I've had so many experiences of blunders and mistakes, and I think I've learned over time. If anyone says anything, I already know, you know, and I, you know, it stops me in so many ways from doing things because I'm afraid of a critic. And sometimes I had, you know, can you justify which is a destructive or constructive criticism? Because sometimes the people you don't want to hear from are quick to tell you you've got it wrong, and and that could keep you in your room for days, locked in. Facebook shut down, everything shut down. I don't want to be anywhere anymore because of the blunders you made. And yeah, my experience with dealing with criticism, I think I've grown, just like what Lee is saying. I've just been growing over time to take it in and to accept and to move on, and also to be real with myself. If I've made an error, put my hands up. And you know, there's some conversation I had with Lee, and Lee said something to me about being vulnerable, where you're able to talk about your failure so easily. And I think that's part of my own way of preparing myself for the highs and the lows, when I get it wrong and when I get it right. It's just, I think one of the things I in my story, when I always get the time to tell my story or talk about a particular subject, I'm always looking for where are my downsides here? Where are the points that I've made errors or made mistakes? And I can share that before I share the parts that I've made really good, you know, impact or success from it. And that for me is just my own way of going through life and dealing with it, especially even writing my book. It was May last year I wrote my book. But I tell you, I've had that book for over a couple of years. And I remember in 2019, I, you know, used time to prepare and to write it. And then I sent it to someone whose opinion I trusted, and their criticism of that book just sent me into, you know, I mean, when someone gives you an opinion, you think they're doing this for your own interest, right? They've got your good interest at heart. They want to make you better. But for whatever reason, that positive or negative feedback you get from them sends you into a land of despair. And I was in there for 6 months. I didn't want to write my book anymore. I just thought, what's the point? I'm never going to get it right. You know, I'm going to hire someone, a ghostwriter, to do it for me. I'm going to get somebody good who's good at writing books. And I'm going to wait until I can afford it and pay a ghostwriter to do it for me. That's what happened to me. I just shut it down and you know, again, so that was how I dealt with it. I just locked away, and sometimes you got to be careful who people. Absolutely right, Lee. You know, sometimes some people think they have a right or they have a right to share their opinions to you, and sometimes, again, when you know, I can review that feedback now and say I need to give them some feedback. But the reality is that, you know, I had to move on from there, and it took me a while. And now I'm learning to let it go. Take the criticism and move on. Like what Trevor said, take it on and move on. Because sometimes it can really hold you down and keep you in that space. And it's always good to have people around you who believe in you, who support what you're doing, and who are careful enough to give you the right information when you need it. And that's what, you know, my own leadership growth or leadership program for myself is knowing when to give a feedback and understanding that people sometimes are not in that space, and how to get them into that space, how to get them into a place where they can take what you're about to say. And I think that those are the kind of leaders that care about you. Those are the kind of leaders who have a human element to what they do, and understand that for people to get to where they are, I need to go there to where they are, see how they see life and see their world, and know how to penetrate and get to them and give them the right feedback that can help them grow. And those are leaders are very scarce. Those kind of people who can really get to you. But hey, I've let you take it on, move on, and keep growing and not let it stop me. So yeah, I hate criticism. I hate it. But now I'm understanding I can only grow from information like that, and just get the best information out of it, the right information, so I can perfect my skill. And again, perfection, as we talked about, is only an illusion. I think there's a journey on this. Just my thoughts. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Kelvin. And I'm just so glad that I let Trevor go first and Sven go last, because I think if I'd done it the other way around, we would have had a serious challenge on our hands. So Sven, on that note, I think you have to see if you can tell us all how we can solve these issues that we have here.
Well, there were some really cool ones already there, so I think that's probably the purpose of those chats is, we just combine our knowledge and put it into a big pot and stir it and see what comes out. And that's probably one of the amazing things. I personally love conflict, for instance, to just come from a very different perspective on the idea of criticism is I love conflict and probably understand more where Edward comes from in the sense of, hey, there's always something to take away from it. And I found kind of there were different ways how criticism happens and how I react on it. And one of the ways is I can be perceived as very critical because I have a very high curiosity and therefore see things very quickly from a completely different perspective and can share that. And then people think like I'm saying like, no, you can't, this is wrong, or you're critical, you're not seeing my point. And I'm just, I have this kind of habit of wanting to balance, to almost kind of be willing to stand on the other side of the seesaw and just say like, if everybody would have said we have to avoid it, I would stand very quickly on the other side and say like, no, we don't have to avoid it. Never avoid a conflict. I would just stand on the other side or the criticism. But that's already quite balanced here. But this is one of the things that I noticed is like, I can be perceived as a critic just because the way I think, the way I share, the way I see the world, the way I share what I see about the world. And people might think like, oh, who are you? Where are you coming from? In the point of receiving criticism, it's a very interesting thing because in my journey, I had definitely loads of moments where I was extremely frustrated with leaders. And one of the things was saying to me, Sven, you're not really loyal, you're not really committed. So from leaders, you're not teachable. Words like this. And for many years, I had no idea what was happening. I just drowned in this. I just felt like something is wrong with me. Because most of the stuff that they said, like teaching, I love learning. For me, it's like, of course I'm teachable. I want to learn. I'm like a sponge. I want to, I'm really open. Why are people thinking I'm not teachable? Just because I challenged with my curiosity, probably what I was taught. But I always was frustrated at the time because actually I didn't know anything about that value of curiosity that lived in me. So one of the things that I had to realize is when we receive criticism, we have this overreaction happening. It could actually be that there's something you don't even know without yourself yet. You have not even seen this very deep identity value part of you that is standing up and tries to protect you and says like, no, don't let anybody go any further. So with leaders, for instance, what I realized when I discovered my core value of curiosity was I realized that always in those moments when leaders said, you're not teachable, you're not loyal, you're not really committed, and things like this, there was also something in common when I felt frustrated. And what was the point was they tried to put me in a box and say, Sven, can you stop asking questions? Can you just go on and do what we do? This is the way we do it here. And so, and when I realized that, I was like, wow, this is just crazy. So it was not necessarily against my, they perceived probably that my other values were wobbly, and they were because of that moment of we try to put you in a box, and I'm not willing to go in the box, just from the very deep side, inside out. And I think that is one of the things how we can learn to receive criticism is say like, why am I standing up? What's happening inside me? What is so difficult, or why is this so difficult? To really understand is like, who am I in this process? especially when there are things said to you that you're feeling, well, why do you criticize this? I value this very, very much. I really give my heart into this. Why are you now standing here and just saying, I'm not doing this? Because I try to as much as I can. You know, I put my whole thing into this, and you're telling me I can't, and that stuff. And the other times that I found criticism happens is when you go into new territory. You do something that is not really expected. You know, like in this whole D&I part, I started collaborating with a Black Muslim woman, having a seminar together. I'm a white Christian man. How does that work? You know? And I knew the moment I would publish that event and just say, like, you know what? I'm going to do this. I connected with her. Really, there was something that connected us. There was something going further. And I thought, like, I want to work with her. But I knew immediately there are some Christians around me and they will not like what I'm doing. How on earth can you work with a Muslim? You know, and I just knew, like, okay, this is me just stepping on the territory where criticism can very quickly happen. And I think that was like, wow, we need to go to this point, you know, and knowing I'm brave. I just take the bravery, the courage inside me, and I actually just step out, you know, because I know it's the right thing to do. I just open myself to criticism. I actually be willing to stand there and let people shoot and just say, like, you know what, I know why I'm here. And I think this is, again, the way we can deal better with criticism is knowing ourselves. If we know ourselves very well, we stand. And this is a lovely part that I felt in my story. You know, I come from communism. I've lived in East Germany, for those people who don't know. And the Berlin Wall took my whole life apart. So I had this constant stuff of learning to grow up and to deal with criticism, the inside criticism. Now, how do I deal with criticism if it really happens? And I've learned something very, very important. Relationship is the number one part that puts me in and says, do I listen or do I not? Who is actually criticizing is, for me, the first question. Who are you? Do you have any relationship to me? Do you know me? Do you know my thinking? Do I know where I'm coming from? Do you actually have any permission to influence my life? Have I given you permission to influence my life? And if I haven't, then you just can talk like Trevor in the chat, who tries to push my buttons. You know? And it's those kind of things where I had to learn to really go into trusted relationships. And now, if you say something that might hurt, that might even pull the carpet under my feet, but if you say that, there's a reason why you say that. There's something I can learn. There's something I could establish and bring further. And that is, I think, you know, where I don't care. Actually, one of the things that really annoys me with British people is they always talk around the bush. You know, they just beat around the bush all the time, you know. While one of my mentors, he is South African, and one of the things when we connected the very first time, the first coffee we had here in Plymouth, it was so funny. We met for coffee, and he said, like, Sven, you're going to have problems with English people when you're here as a German, because, you know, the British, they always beat around the bush, but, you know, Germans and South Africans were more direct, you know, and we just connected on that. And I know when he says something, that could just come across very impolite, but I know it comes from the heart. I can hear that. I take the information, and I'm willing to take the information because there's relationship. There's something. There's a trust in that relationship, and I had to learn that. to just, decide very clearly which voice I'm listening to and which voice I'm just simply not listening to. Because there are so many people who have opinions about everything, and I'm certainly one of them because I'm curious. I have opinions about almost anything, but I know it's not about that. I don't have to listen to every opinion, and I don't want to listen to every opinion. But one of the things I do when a very good friend of me criticizes me, or even people I trust and not necessarily have the deepest relationship, but I really have a different perspective, what I've learned to do is just go my hiding place and say, like, let's think about this. I never thought about it really. It has not been in my scope. Let's think about this and learn. So for me, that's definitely a place where criticism goes.
Great, thanks, Sven. Yeah, some excellent points there. A couple of points that come to mind as we're all talking here is, firstly, free advice is very often worth exactly what you paid for it. So you've got to consider it from that perspective. And the second is, criticism often tells you more about the criticizers than the critique. So I think you got to think about that one as well. So. Don't take it too personally, but I think, as everyone said, there's also opportunity to learn. So I certainly believe we all learn, if we allow ourselves to, more from our failures than from our successes. So if you actually are prepared to look at your failures and say, well, okay, well, how do I learn? How do I grow? How do I improve from this point? You're going to gain much more value out of it than say, fantastic, I succeeded at this, I did it perfectly. There's nothing more to learn. So where do you go from there? So yeah, I think as I say, criticism for me, yeah, look at where it's coming from, as Sven said. Is it a relationship? Is it a trusted source? And what does it tell you about the person criticizing? Not necessarily what does it tell you about you, because it's more often not coming from a perspective of a completely different set of glasses, if I can put it that way. They've got their own internal challenges and ideas, and thanks, Trevor. I really appreciate it. I know you're such an absolute charmer, and that's why I've stuck around with you for so long. So yeah. So anyway, I think on that note, we just have to call a halt to this because it's going sideways. So thanks to Trevor. So focus. Yeah. So Lee, I think we better go back to you to wrap us up and tell us what's on the cards for next week.
Well, thanks everybody. Sven, welcome. It was lovely to have you on board. Just wonderful sharing and thinking, and everybody's contribution is. I'm affirming. You see, going the opposite direction to criticism. This is also very reassuring to feel like we've done a good job. And but this thing about Trevor spoke about putting your head above the parapet. And Sven spoke about standing up and being willing to take the arrows or the shots. And so that's what I'd like us to focus on next week, is what are you willing to stick your head up for? Knowing that you could well get the arrows and the critiques, but it's something that is of such importance and value to you that it's worth the cost. So let's talk about that tomorrow. Next week, Tuesday, 8 o'clock in the morning, UK time.
Great, thanks.
Always the same link? Is it always the same link, or do you have
the same links?
Okay, because I can put it in the diary and just let it run. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, have a great week, folks. Come back with your heads still attached if you're sticking them up above those parapets. So don't lose them in the process. And we look forward to another great discussion next Tuesday. Have a good week. Cheers now.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, guys.
And thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.